best part of living in Anchorage is the people, and it's because we find our own fun.
It's a very exciting place, not just because of earthquakes and volcanoes.
Well, we have wildlife. We have moose. We have bears in town. It's almost like being in the woods to be in Anchorage.
You know, in the summertime, there's lots of things to do. There's lots of places to go hike.
You can hop on a train, a plane, or get in a car, and within 10 minutes be in God's country.
I like the sunlight, and I like the coffee.
I think Anchorage is a really friendly place. People here smile at you on the street. Great place to live.
But in the winter, you know, there's a lot of festivities.
Hi guys, this is Mr. Whitekeys, and as you can see, if you ask someone who lives in Anchorage what they like about their hometown, well, it's like asking a moose what he likes to eat in your garden. There are so many wonderful choices. In the next little while, we're going to take a look at Alaska's largest city. From our first days as a tent camp to the modern Anchorage we see today. From the famous winter festivals to the glorious days of summer. From the wildlife to the wild life. Ha ha ha! It's all here in Big Wild Anchorage. Or at least it should be. Anchorage is set in one of the most beautiful natural settings in the world. It's nestled between the shores of Upper Cook Inlet and the spectacular Chugach Mountains. About half the people who live in Alaska call Anchorage home. And they do everything. Singers, bush pilots, break dancers, guys who grow a lot of facial hair. Even guys who carve with chainsaws. If you can think of a job, we probably have it here. Anchorage is the center of commerce for the last frontier. And behind the windows of the shiny skyscrapers, people do important stuff for oil companies and other big businesses. Anchorage has over 200 city parks and miles of trails. We've got a lake that's an airport. We've got an airport that's an airport. And a visitor center that occasionally needs trimming. In the winter, you can run with the reindeer. And then in the summer, the hot dogs, well, they're made from reindeer. And to think all this uniqueness has only been around since 1915. Archaeologists believe that human occupation in the Anchorage area actually began about 5,000 years ago. When Russian exploration of Alaska began in the 18th century, the Athabaskan Dena'ina people occupied the Anchorage area, with their territory spanning from the Alaska Range and Cook Inlet to the Kuskokwim and Iliamna. In the summer, they fished the streams of Cook Inlet and hunted beluga whales on Turnagain Arm. It wasn't until Captain James Cook set sail for Alaska that the land that would soon be Anchorage was mapped. In waters not far from present-day Anchorage, mudflats forced them to turn and look for a new route. A few miles later, they were forced to turn again. The boats had been turned around so many times that Captain Cook named this the River Turnagain. It was later renamed by his midshipman, George Vancouver, to what it is called today, the Turnagain Arm. Over 100 years later, people started coming to Turnagain Arm with gold fever. In 1895, prospectors set up mining camps in Sunrise City, Hope, and Girdwood. Until miners left for the Yukon in 1897, this Turnagain area was the most active mining district in Alaska.
One of the important offshoots of the Turnagain Arm gold rush is several hundred people fanned out around Turnagain Arm and up the Susitna River and other parts of Cook Inlet looking for gold and also looking for places to settle as homesteads. And 20 years after the commercial discovery of gold near Hope in 1895, several of those people were camped out and had built cabins at the mouth of Ship Creek.
But the real influx of people to the Anchorage area began in 1914, when President Woodrow Wilson announced the building of the Alaska Railroad. The regional headquarters for this project would be in Ship Creek, and soon after, a tent city sprung up. By the time construction had begun in the summer of 1915, the town had a population of 2,000. That summer, the first auction was held for land in Anchorage, Alaska. Over 700 town lots were auctioned for about $220 per lot. Irma Lee Hickel was born in Anchorage in 1925. She remembers a simpler time.
We always put a net in the inlet too, and fished for salmon, of course. And our job then was to go after each tide went out. We would have to go down and fish, take the fish out of the nets. And then we enjoyed that too. It was kind of fun to play in the mud.
World War II greatly increased military presence in Anchorage. The bombing of Dutch Harbor and the capture of Attu and Kiska Islands led to a massive influx of soldiers and resources. During this period, Anchorage became the transportation hub, and the city grew from 4,000 in 1940 to 47,000 by 1951. The next big booms for Anchorage were the discovery of oil on the Kenai Peninsula in 1957 and then statehood for Alaska in 1959. The town was hopping with new energy and business. Well, just when everything was going great, there was a different kind of moving and shaking in Anchorage. And the topic always comes up in the form of a question. Were you here during the earthquake in '64? The largest quake ever to hit North America, measuring 9.2 on the Richter scale, changed the landscape forever. For 5 minutes, the land rose and dropped and shook like never before or since. Fourth Avenue split in two, buildings crumbled, and in the Turnagain neighborhood on the bluffs of Cook Inlet, the quake destroyed nearly everything.
And we got out in the snow, and the shaking was so bad that it just flung us to the ground right beyond the house. Couldn't stand it all. And a few seconds later, I turned back to look where we came from, and the front doorway had split right down the middle, and the chimney had fallen down on top of the roof. And then I couldn't believe my eyes because the whole roof began to fall in, and I could look and see the kitchen and the living room and everything inside. And I guess that the most frightening moment was when I saw the foundation of the house begin to crack open.
Of course, Anchorage rebuilt after that quake. Former Governor Walter Hickel decided to build his Captain Cook Hotel while the 10,000 aftershocks were still shaking a nervous Anchorage.
When the earthquake came, they was going to move the town. I called a press conference. I says, I'm going to build a Captain Cook Hotel, and I'm going to start right now, and I'm going to open in 1 year. And the whole country helped me out. No one said you can't. In 1 year's time, we opened the Captain Cook Hotel, and here it is.
Much of the area destroyed by the quake is part of what is now Earthquake Park. But many of the nicer and newer homes in the Turnagain neighborhood are built in the same area destroyed back in 1964.
So are we crazy or just optimists? We really don't want to know the answer to that question. You know, the current slogan for the Anchorage Convention and Visitors Bureau is the Big Wild Life. And that's just about right, considering our history. But the big wildlife also fits, especially when you've got a 1,000-pound moose in your front yard.
It happens all the time. Anchorage is home for lots of wild critters, and moose are probably the most common.
I think we must be the biggest city, at least in North America, that has moose. And they're just a large deer, but they're a very large deer. They're 1,000 pounds on average. And there are lots of them here. In the summertime, there are probably 200 or 300 moose in the Anchorage Bowl, which is the metropolitan area. And then in winter, when the snow gets really deep in the mountains, that forces the moose out looking for food into what used to be their wintering range, which is the Anchorage Bowl, where we live. And there's as many as 1,000 moose in town.
During the spring in Anchorage, you gotta watch out for the little ones all over town. These wobbly-legged calves are just a few hours old, and their mom is just learning how to maneuver around the kids. If you live in Anchorage, you learn to watch out for moose.
Well, because they're big and because they're wild, and they're not at all tame, you have to watch out for them. I mean, we're looking for them for enjoyment and to watch them, but it's a wise idea if you live in a neighborhood that has frequent moose sightings. When you go out your door, you look both ways, because you don't want to have a moose standing between you and your car, 3 feet away, 5 feet away, especially in winter. Sometimes they'll, if it's the sunny side of the house especially, they'll go and lay up against the side of your house because it's a nice warm spot, and you can almost stumble over them when you walk out the door.
Both brown bears and black bears wander Anchorage, often looking for moose calves to eat. And one of our more shy residents are lynx, the only wildcat to live in Alaska. Anchorage has many wildlife viewing destinations. One is along the Seward Highway just south of town, where you can often see Dall sheep. These all-white sheep are often grazing right next to the highway. They're expert rock climbers and not sheepish to show off their skills. Several bands of Dall sheep live in the Chugach Mountains in Anchorage's backyard. Sometimes you get a close-up look, and sometimes they're just white dots on the mountainside. This is Potter Marsh, created in 1917 during the construction of an Alaska Railroad embankment. Potter Marsh is a favorite spot for watching birds. Arctic terns and mew gulls are common nesters at the marsh. Arctic terns are the #1 champion winged migrators. Every year, they make a 25,000-mile round trip between their breeding grounds here in the north and their wintering grounds in the Antarctic. These are trumpeter swans. They'll often stop here in the spring and again in the fall along their migratory route. Trumpeters are the world's largest waterfowl, with males averaging 28 pounds. When they're about 2 years old, they pair up and mate for life. This family group is heading south for the winter, but they'll linger at Potter Marsh until late September or even October, depending on the weather and the bed tax. Sometimes you get an up-close look at our winged neighbors like great horned owls. An owl family was quite the attraction when they set up housekeeping behind Potter Marsh.
Well, of course, seeing wildlife is never guaranteed, but it actually is guaranteed if you visit the Alaska Zoo, where the animals in the zoo are the ones that were there before they built the fence.
The Alaska Zoo is a favorite destination for Alaskans and visitors alike. You'll see many of the hard-to-see animals like wolverine and wolves. This pack of wolves came to the zoo as puppies. They're gray wolves. A wild pack of gray wolves roams the hillsides of Anchorage. An animal you won't find wandering in Anchorage, at least we hope not, is the Siberian tiger. The zoo's 2 tigers were born in captivity and brought to the zoo in 2008. The Alaska Zoo has 3 types of bears.
Well, the 3 species of bears that we have here are black bear, brown bear, and then polar bears, just like Louie and Apoon right behind me. This is the male polar bear, and at this point he's 9 years of age. And in the background, that's Apoon, and she's the 11-year-old female polar bear that was orphaned up on Point Lay. So Apoon's the one that came in as a baby at 20 pounds.
The Alaska Zoo got its start after a local grocer entered a contest and won a baby elephant.
The prize was $3,000 or a baby elephant. In those days, $3,000 was quite a bit. And so he thought, oh, great. He had 5 children. He said, I'll win the elephant, and then I'll give her to the zoo, and they'll build a zoo. So he bought enough chiffon tissue to win the elephant.
In 1969, the Alaska Children's Zoo opened, taking in orphaned and injured animals that needed homes. Today, it's simply called the Alaska Zoo.
And while we're talking about Anchorage's wild side, how about the runs of wild salmon right here in downtown Anchorage? How many other cities do you know where you can catch a 40-pounder on your lunch break?
This is Ship Creek. Ship Creek has 2 main runs, and king salmon are the first to arrive, usually in early June. It's sometimes tricky to fish with the huge tides and slippery mud banks. But when the fishing is hot, lots of urban fisherfolk line the banks of the creek to hook into a king and avoid being hooked by their neighbor. If you're here during the Salmon Derby in June, there's a chance to catch a king salmon that might pay for your whole trip. Or you can just take your winnings home for dinner. At Westchester Lagoon, one of the attractions, and a favorite of yours truly, is watching salmon entering the lagoon via Chester Creek. And even when the salmon aren't visible, the view of the Chugach Mountains is just one more reason you gotta love Anchorage. Dan Sullivan grew up in Anchorage, and in 2009 even got himself elected mayor.
First and foremost, you just look around and you realize you live in one of the most beautiful natural settings you could ever imagine a city nestling into, and we're just so lucky. Every day it's a little bit different light and different colors of the trees and stuff. So, the first thing is always we're just really in one of God's most beautiful natural settings, and that's as good as it gets. And then you compound that and add to that with the people that live here. And tourists have told me over and over again over the years that, oh my gosh, the people in Anchorage were so nice to us, and it makes it special.
One of Anchorage's most used trails is the Tony Knowles Coastal Trail, which stretches 11 miles along the coast of Knik Arm from downtown to Kincaid Park. It's a popular trail both summer and winter. The overlook near Point Woronzof is one of the best places to take a picture of Anchorage's skyline and enjoy the sunsets. Anchorage's Lake Spenard and Lake Hood make up the busiest float plane base in the world. In the summer, the buzz of planes taking off and landing is almost non-stop. For many Alaskans, having a plane is like having a second car. Some people even keep their planes at home. And besides Lake Hood and neighborhood airstrips, many private pilots use Merrill Field, which was Anchorage's first real airport, dating back to 1930. And if you'd like to know more about the aviation history of Alaska, well, we've got a museum for that.
If you want to learn about historic aircraft and the guys who flew them by the seat of their pants, there is no better place than the Alaska Aviation Heritage Museum.
Located aside Lake Hood and near the Anchorage International Airport, you'll walk among airplanes flown by the greatest aviators of Alaska's past, including this 1928 Stearman.
Well, Joe Crossan flew that airplane. He's one of our most famous bush pilots. He flew that airplane at 30 below in an open cockpit, several hours out to the villages, and saved hundreds of people's lives back in the 30s.
The Aviation Heritage Museum even has a Boeing 737 donated to the museum by Alaska Airlines. The Anchorage Museum is another window into Alaska's past and the colorful art history of the last frontier. It first opened in 1968 with 60 borrowed paintings. Today, it's the state's largest museum with 24,000 permanent objects in its collection. In the Alaska Gallery, you can stroll through Alaska's history. You'll meet the first peoples of Alaska. And if you think you recognize the mannequins in these exhibits, you might be right. The faces on these mannequins were modeled after real Alaskans living today. From the native history to the gold rush, to an actual piece of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, the Alaska Gallery is a quintessential look at Alaska's history. The Art of the North galleries feature art reflecting life in Alaska. From sketches made by the first Europeans to explore Alaska to the brush strokes of painter Sidney Lawrence, the Northern Light and Life is on display at the Anchorage Museum at Rasmussen Center. Another rich and fascinating attraction is the Alaska Native Heritage Center. It's a place to experience the life of Alaska's first people.
Song and dance are they're very important, especially in the area where I come from, because it has a dual purpose. One is for spiritual purpose, and then the other one is a social purpose. The spiritual purpose back in the day and to this day I think is pretty significant, is that it ensured that we honored the spirits of the animals that were given to us by the Creator, to ensure that our survival will be, or the harvest in the upcoming season will be bountiful, so that we can rejoice them more. And the second is the social aspect of it, is to renew and strengthen our family ties, extended family ties from one village to another.
This is Conan O'Brien. This is Jay Leno, made out of spruce wood or yellow cedar and muskox fir.
In the Hall of Cultures, Native artisans demonstrate their crafts. And if you're lucky, you might meet a late-night celebrity.
Wearing the pigs, which are traditional to show that there's no straps to keep them on.
Okay, I know what you're asking yourself. Anchorage has lots of attractions: culture, history, museums, wildlife, blah, 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 blah. But what about the important stuff? What about golf?
Playing through here, playing through here, playing through here.
Yes, people golf in Alaska. And during midsummer, when we have over 19 hours from sunrise to sunset, the tee times stretch till late at night.
Well, probably the most unique thing is the length of our day. And we have tee times from 5 in the morning till 10 at night, and golfers can play till after midnight. And it's still light enough for them to see, and it's a beautiful time of evening.
Our long summer days are not just good for golf. The flower gardens thrive. City gardeners give the flowers a head start in the municipal greenhouse. Then, in the spring, they brighten up every corner of the city with the vibrant colors of summer. In Girdwood, the bake shop is famous for its begonias and its cinnamon rolls.
In many ways, Anchorage isn't any different than any other city. We live in houses, not in igloos, and you can't see Russia from here. Unless, of course, you're on the 3rd floor.
We're a university town with 2 college campuses. We've got first-class medical centers, our own performing arts center, and a world-class convention center. Speaking of conventions, if you were in Anchorage during the World Beard and Mustache Championships, well, you might have gotten the wrong idea about Alaskans and facial hair. Or on second thought, maybe you got the right idea. There are lots of diverse cultures in Anchorage, and our community events celebrate each and every one. Besides being a center of transportation and commerce, Anchorage is a military town. The first flying unit arrived at Elmendorf Field in 1941, and today they're still providing top cover for America. Elmendorf's Arctic Thunder Air Show is historically one of the biggest two-day events in Alaska.
I got the stick over here, I got the throttle over here, and once I got everything set up...
When the Thunderbirds are in town, it really is Arctic Thunder. If you want to really get to know your neighbors in Anchorage, just come downtown on the 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July!
The parade circles the Anchorage Park Strip. The Park Strip is a downtown park used for all types of community events. On any given day, you might enjoy a concert, meet for soccer practice, or enjoy a fine hamburger or hot dog served up by Alaska's very own governor. This is the governor's annual picnic. And in 2009, outgoing Governor Sarah Palin was as much the attraction as the baked beans. We love our summers in Anchorage, a chance to get out and ride our bikes. Perhaps do a little bird watching. Take the dogs on a hike. Or take the kids on a hike. Or explore the beauty which is all around us. There are lots of running events in Anchorage. From the Alaska Women's Run in June, which raises awareness and money to fight breast cancer, to the Mayor's Marathon, probably the only race where you've got to worry more about moose or bears on the trail than your finish time.
So you could see a moose, you could see a bear. Probably the only marathon in the world where you actually have a grizzly bear hazards in the first 10 miles of the race.
Summer is the time for our neighborhood markets. This is the farmer's market in South Anchorage.
They'll get up to 1.5 inches in diameter and almost a foot long, not quite.
We wait all winter for days like this, when we can pick up fresh Alaska-grown produce. And it's not just the produce that draws in all sorts of ne'er-do-wells.
There's a lot of vegetables. There's beets, there's cabbage, but the meat is where it's at.
When visiting family and friends come to town, here are a few things on the list of attractions in and just outside Anchorage.
Please have a seat, say hello to your new fellow Alaskans. I'll be with you in just a few minutes. Okay.
You might want to take a tour aboard the trolley. You gotta see downtown. Take a stroll on 4th Avenue. And if you're a carnivore, try one of the famous and tasty reindeer hot dogs. Taking a drive south along the Seward Highway to Girdwood is always popular. In the right season, you might even see beluga whales on Turnagain Arm. Along the way, near Bird, you'll usually find Jordan Anderson at work. You'll be amazed at what he can do with his imagination and a chainsaw.
I consider myself and a lot of our other professional chainsaw carvers as actual sculptors. You know, like Michelangelo once said, there's an angel in the rock, and I just have to reveal it.
In Girdwood itself, there's the aforementioned bake shop, art galleries, the Alyeska Resort, and it's a great place to take a hike in the woods.
First off, the drive is unbelievable. I mean, when you're driving along that coast, and it's only a short bit, 30 minutes of a drive, and you get down to Girdwood and you're in a rainforest, and you can go out there, and it doesn't matter if some fair is going on or some activity at the mountain, there's always something you can do down there. And I like going down there because it's also very peaceful. It's a small part of Anchorage, but it's urban yet very rural at the same time.
An hour drive south of town is Portage Glacier. How many cities do you know that are still partly in the Ice Age? A short cruise on Portage Lake brings you to the face of this frozen river of ice. Another popular day trip is a cruise from Whittier to see the glaciers and wildlife of Prince William Sound. The 26 Glacier Cruise delivers on its promise of seeing more than 24 glaciers on one cruise. And if you're lucky, you'll experience the thunder as the ice falls from the glacier's face. A 2-hour drive south of town and you're in Seward, gateway to Kenai Fjords National Park. The coastal waters are rich with wildlife and the extraordinary natural wonders of Alaska's rugged coast. If you have more than a day, many people take the train or drive north to Denali National Park. Lucky visitors are in the park when Mount McKinley is visible. Known as Denali, or the High One, it's the tallest peak in North America. Visitors to Denali often see grizzly bears, caribou, and wolves while on a day-long bus tour.
But all that summer daylight and activity can drive a guy bat wacky, and sometimes you just need a break. And that's what fall in Anchorage is like, a break between the busy summer season and our approaching winter.
Fall is the season of color. The birch turn golden, and the tundra of Chugach State Park changes from green to red. In the fall, the big male moose have sparring contests to see who gets the girl. Sort of like most Anchorage bars on a Friday night. Bulls congregate in places like Powerline Pass in the Chugach State Park.
September and October are the moose rutting period, which is the mating period. And so moose are attracted to each other during that time of year, both the bulls and the cows. And the bulls attract each other to fight, and the cows are attracted to the bulls, and the bulls are attracted to the cows, and that's one of the areas. They've just picked it. There's all manner of what's called jousting and displays and ritualized movements and stuff, and the bulls will show the sides to each other, kind of make sure that the other bull knows just how big they really are. They'll kind of bend their head back and forth slowly and let them see those antlers and make sure they understand how big those antlers are, because the bull with the biggest antlers and the biggest neck and the biggest mass, the strongest bull, is often the bull that wins the privileges to go to the cows. It's a wonderful place. It's a world-class moose viewing area up there.
This contest will end with no real damage. These relatively small bull moose are just practice fighting, but sometimes moose will be fatally injured in these battles. Winter in Anchorage often arrives like a flock of bohemian waxwings on a mountain ash tree. It just swoops in, and the next thing you know, it's winter. These waxwings move from tree to tree, all over Anchorage, until the fruit is gone, and then they're gone. So what's winter like? Well, compared to many places in Alaska, winter here is pretty mild. The average winter temperature ranges between 5 and 30 degrees above zero. But it does get a lot colder. And we'll have weeks at a time with 20 below zero as our daytime high temperature. During those cold snaps, waterfalls freeze, hoarfrost covers the trees and shrubs, and Anchorage turns into a winter wonderland. In winter, life goes on pretty much as usual. Living in the north, we just get used to it. And not just used to it, we get out and enjoy ourselves. Anchorage has 140 miles of groomed cross-country ski trails. Great for recreation and the occasional competitive events. Like the Tour of Anchorage. The Tour is a ski marathon that attracts competitors from all over the world.
The Tour of Anchorage, it's the biggest ski race in Alaska, and it kind of circumnavigates the city. And it's just a great event that sort of culminates the ski season up here. No, it's a fun race. It's a hard race. Probably the hardest part about the race is you're on the flats for so long, which makes it difficult for some and easier for others. But it's one of the things that gives the race a lot of character.
For downhill skiing, you can take your pick from neighborhood ski areas like Alpenglow and Hilltop, or a short drive to Girdwood and the Alyeska Ski Resort. Hilltop is right in Anchorage's backyard. If you learn to downhill ski in Anchorage, there's a good chance you learned right here. Alyeska is the premier ski resort for Alaska. The average snowfall here is 750 inches. The resort features 2,500 feet of vertical terrain, which means there are lots of ways and places to go downhill fast. And you get back uphill on the 8 lifts or by riding the tram. Even if you don't ski, the magnificent view from up top is worth the ride. One of the often asked questions is about the darkness of winter. At winter solstice, there are just 5 hours and 28 minutes of daylight. And believe me, we count all the minutes between sunup and sundown. And then we get ready to party. The New Year's Eve celebration in Anchorage is just one of many ways we get out and shake off the icicle. The Fire and Ice celebration in Town Square always attracts a crowd because it's tons of fun and it's free. Our next winter event is the Fur Rendezvous. Another excuse to shoot off a bunch of fireworks. This wintertime celebration dates back to 1935. And the reason behind the Fur Rendezvous has been pretty much the same all these years. A way to convince ourselves that the long winter isn't all that bad. And so we do crazy things. Like put on funny costumes and run through the streets of downtown Anchorage. It's called the Frostbite Foot Race. Some years they race cars during the Fur Rendezvous. And if that's not enough adrenaline, someone came up with this idea. Hey, let's run with reindeer. This is Alaska's version of Spain's Running with the Bulls. All you need are 1,000 or so people who don't really care what happens, and a handful of reindeer who'd rather run for fun than be featured on a menu. And there you have it, the running of the reindeer in Anchorage, Alaska.
It's absolutely amazing. I've never seen anything like it before.
Oh, it was fun. It was fun. I think I got more of a kick out of the costumes, people dressed up as the reindeer than the actual reindeer.
Nope.
1, 2, 3, look at me.
Snowshoe softball is another Rondi event. If you've got snowshoes and a few friends, that's all it takes. Of course, if you hit the ball, then you have to run the bases, and that's where the fun really begins. The featured event of the Anchorage Fur Rendezvous is the World Championship Sled Dog Race.
4, 3, 2, 1, go! And Blaine Streeper, defending world champion and race leader, is outbound.
The three-day event features the fastest Huskies in the North, competing along the streets and trails of Anchorage. It's a sprint from start to finish. The musher and team with the best overall time is crowned the champion. On the heels of the Fur Rendezvous comes Alaska's most famous long-distance sled dog race, the Iditarod.
Glad to see everybody out on the streets. You know, it's kind of a big festival more than anything.
Anchorage is the ceremonial start of the Iditarod. Another excuse to put on the parka and head downtown to see the dog teams and mushers as they begin a 1,000-mile journey across Alaska.
And she's off. Jessica Cuenca, our junior Iditarod champion, 2008.
winter really is full of fun. We complain about it being too long, but when you look at all the fun we have, you understand why, for many Alaskans, winter is the best time of year. The last big winter event, or maybe it's the first big springtime event, takes us back to the Alyeska Ski Resort for the annual Slush Cup. What red-blooded Alaska man wouldn't want to watch girls walking around in bikinis? But that's just the warm-up. The Slush Cup features a pool of ice-cold water at the bottom of a ski run. The goal is to somehow make it all the way across. Well, there you have it. Big Wild Anchorage, Alaska. We're pretty proud of the place we call home. It's not perfect, but at least we don't have a sales tax.